Rabbi Coleman, Rabbi David, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, I would like to begin my few words this evening, first of all by saying, really with a very full heart, how grateful I am and how privileged I feel to be invited to speak to you all on the occasion of this 50th anniversary of the publication of the document Nostra Aetate, which, as we've heard, is one of the documents issued by the Second Vatican Council. This council was a gathering of the Catholic bishops of the world, called to Rome by Pope John the 23rd in 1962 to consider the place and role of the Catholic Church in the modern world. The council took 5 years, finishing on December the 8th in 1965, 50 years ago this year. Sometimes it takes the church a long time to get things done. It won't take me 5 years to address you tonight, so you don't need to worry. Just before we entered into the synagogue this evening, Father Michael Moore reminded me that I think today Pope Francis announced that he would be visiting the synagogue in Rome, in Jerusalem, the synagogue in Jerusalem in January next year. I wonder if he heard about our initiative tonight and thought it was a good idea and decided to emulate us. Who knows? Certainly, while my thanks go to all those involved in organising this very important, very significant event, I do want to thank in a special way and reciprocate the words that Rabbi David used, my good friend, Rabbi David, and to express my admiration for you. The Jewish community in our city and in our state is extraordinarily fortunate and blessed to have you as their leader. Thank you for your inspiration in promoting this event and for your generosity in allowing it to be held in this sacred place. I'm very honoured to be here. As some of you would know, I was privileged earlier this year to address a meeting of the Western Australian Council of Christians and Jews. And this evening I want to share with you all some of the same thoughts I expressed then, albeit in a different context. And in the light of the recent events in Paris and other places around the world, and in light of the passion with which Rabbi David prayed our prayer this evening, I'd like to invite you all to have these terrible events in your mind and think about how the ideas I might share with you this evening might help us together to understand what is happening in our world and to see what we can do about it. I'm very conscious that I come among you here this evening as the representative of the Catholic community in Perth and, in a sense, in Western Australia. And I hope that my presence with you can be a sign of the growing friendship and mutual respect which is developing not only between Rabbi David and myself, but between our two communities of faith. The long history of relationships between our two communities all around the world has been a troubled one, to say the least. This evening marks another step, in one sense a small step, in another sense a very significant step, in the journey towards reconciliation. I think it's a journey which calls our two communities to move forward, never forgetting the past, but all determined to make sure that the present and the future look very different. I was appointed as an assistant bishop in Melbourne in 2007 and Archbishop of Perth in 2012. Prior to that, theology, both here in Perth at Notre Dame University and also for much longer at the Catholic Theological College in Melbourne, which is part of the Ecumenical College of Divinity in that state and city. And as a young man, much younger than I am now, I also trained as a teacher. So I mention this only to warn you that it's very easy for me to slip into lecturing mode. I'll try not to do that this evening. Rather, this evening, what I would like to do is share with you something of my own faith in the light of Nostra Aetate, in the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, in the hope that this might encourage all of you, together with me, to reflect on the God who has called us into life and who asks us to live that life as a precious gift given to us by Him. A part of God's call to us, I am absolutely convinced, is His will that we should live in harmony and mutual respect with all our brothers and sisters, members of the human family. How much more then should Jews and Christians who acknowledge the same God as Father of us all reach out to each other with familial love? At the time of the Second Vatican Council, the Catholic Church opened the door to respectful and sincere dialogue with the followers of other religions. It is a door that should never have been closed in the first place. As a contemporary Catholic, and in a sense a child of the Second Vatican Council, it really is a source of great puzzlement and deep shame to me that it took close to 2,000 years for the Church to arrive at the point where we now find ourselves. As I will mention again in a moment, I carry in my mind's eye the image of an ailing Pope John Paul II standing in prayer at the Western Wall in Jerusalem and placing into a crevice in the wall a written plea to the Lord for forgiveness for the pain and suffering inflicted on the Jewish people by members of the Church. I'm sure that the Pope's words on that occasion are very familiar to many of you. We are deeply saddened, he wrote, by the behaviour of those who in the course of history have caused these children of yours to suffer. And asking your forgiveness, we wish to commit ourselves to genuine brotherhood with the people of the covenant. Tonight, both personally and as the Catholic Archbishop of Perth, I want to associate myself, and I hope the community to which I belong, with these words of Pope John Paul II. And of course, in asking for the Lord's forgiveness, we also ask humbly for forgiveness from those who have suffered so much at our hands. Although when we read it now, and this is certainly my experience, when we now read the declaration on the relation of the Church to non-Christian religions, or Nostra Aetate, published in 1965 as we've seen, when we first read it, it may seem rather tentative and timid. But the fact is that it did usher in a new era in Jewish and Christian relations. In the Catholic Church, This new understanding, which in many ways was initiated by Pope John the 23rd, was confirmed and fostered and deepened by Pope Paul VI, by Pope John Paul II, by Pope Benedict, and now by Pope Francis. The leadership of our Catholic Church has been explicit, clear, and unequivocal in this matter, not just in words, but also in actions, both official and personal. Many of us would be aware of the deep friendship which has existed for many years between Pope Francis and Rabbi Abraham Skorka of Buenos Aires. We will remember too the images of the pilgrimages made by Pope Benedict, and as I've already mentioned, by Pope John Paul II, to the Holy Land, and also, of course, to the chief synagogue in Rome. And we might also be aware of the close boyhood friendships which existed between the young Karol Wojtyła, later Pope John Paul II, and some of the children of his Jewish neighbours in Wadowice, especially the young Jerzy Kluger. I'm very conscious that it was Pope John Paul who in 1986 reminded Catholics that the members of the Jewish faith can be thought of as what he termed our elder brothers in the faith of Abraham. Pope John the 23rd had used a similar phrase before him. Pope Benedict would instead call the Jewish people our fathers in the faith of Abraham, not our older brothers, our fathers in the faith of Abraham, as he felt that the phrase elder brother might carry echoes of the story of Jacob and Esau, in which the elder brother was rejected in favour of the younger brother. In Pope Benedict's mind at the time, I am sure, was the fact that it is formal, official Catholic teaching that God has never rejected or repudiated his covenant with the Jewish people. I'm not sure how Jewish people react to either phrase, elder brother or father, in the faith of Abraham, but it does occur to me that for most of our 2,000-year history, we Catholics, and most Christians generally, have not treated our older brother or our father with the respect and deference he deserves. As the younger brother or son, we have taken a different path in faith to our elders, and this can inevitably give rise to resentment, to anger, to suspicion, or even worse, on both sides. But just as in other families, such reactions are in the end a sign, and therefore often the cause, of deep and destructive immaturity, so it is with us. And as we know to our cost and to our shame, immaturity and arrogance and hard-heartedness can have terrible consequences. Nostra Aetate, with the full authority of our Church, called on Catholics to repudiate all of this. Hopefully we and all Christians are learning to do so. Towards the end of Nostra Aetate, the document reminds us, and I quote, that we cannot truly call on God, the Father of all, if we refuse to treat in a brotherly way any man created as he is in the image of God. For some, the exclusive language may grate, but the sentiment is sound. And it's captured very beautifully in the prayer composed especially by Rabbi David and prayed on our behalf by Rabbi Coleman this evening. That prayer speaks of God as our Heavenly Father, our merciful Father, the Master of the universe, whose name will be sanctified when we are true examples in fostering harmony, respect and love, not only between our two communities, but among all people. The fatherhood of God is, for me, deepened and in a sense illuminated by the opening chapters of the book of Genesis. There we are told in the inspired words of the Torah that human beings are created in the image of God. This pivotal idea, certainly in the Christian tradition of scriptural reflection and interpretation, is fundamental to our understanding of what it means to be a human person called into existence by a loving Father. To my embarrassment, I must confess that I don't have a very good understanding of the undoubtedly long history of Jewish reflection and interpretation of the particular phrase, the image of God, or of its meaning within the book of Genesis, or indeed within the whole of the Torah. And I'm conscious too that my own understanding of the book of Genesis has been forged in the context of a typically Western philosophical, cultural and linguistic context, as well, of course, as in a Christian context, and that this may well differ, perhaps radically, from the contexts in which Jewish thinkers have approached these sacred texts. But what I hope to do tonight is simply share something with all of you of what my own theological tradition has bequeathed to me, hoping that it might stimulate all of us here this evening to revisit and deepen our own understandings of this very important idea, and rejoicing and allow ourselves to be challenged by what we perhaps share as our common inheritance in understanding what it means to be made in the image of God. In the Christian tradition, the books of the Bible are divided into chapters and verses. The phrase image of God comes in the first chapter of the book of Genesis in verse 26. I'm sure we're all familiar with it, but I'll just remind you of it. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful, and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it." From the beginnings of Christianity, there has been a long history of reflection and interpretation of this phrase. And certainly in the past, I've had to spend quite a bit of time studying this tradition. And I do have, I think, some sense of the many strands of interpretation in Christian thought. Nevertheless, important and valuable as it is to know the history of the various interpretations in our traditions, sometimes it's also good to simply go back to the text and try, difficult though it might be, to read it with fresh eyes. The fact that the phrase occurs in verse 26 means that there are 25 verses which precede it. It's worth asking ourselves if these earlier verses might give us a clue as to the meaning of the phrase upon which we are reflecting. And to help us do that, I want to make this suggestion, and the young people over here might tell me afterwards whether I've got this right or not. If you were to read this passage from the first verse to verse 28 to a young child, and then ask him or her, what kind of God are we talking about? I feel sure that many of the children might respond, well, it's a God who makes things. In the first chapter of Genesis, God makes the sun and the moon, the day and the night, the stars in the heavens, all the plants and animals, and then finally, people, human beings. And it is these, the first human beings, and only these, whom we are told are made in the image and likeness of God. Because of the context in which the phrase image and likeness occurs, because it comes, in other words, at the end and as the high point of a long presentation of God as a creative, life-giving God, it seems to me quite possible to suggest that we human beings most truly fulfil our calling, our destiny, our vocation to be the living images of God in the world when we are creative and life-giving. And for this reason, I think it's no coincidence that the text goes on to say immediately that God created humanity as male and female and directed them, us, to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue. To give life, to nurture life, to care for life, to be at the service of life. If my understanding of this part of the book of Genesis has any value in it at all, this is the most godlike thing that we can do. And of course, to do the opposite, even if we do so in the name of religion, is the most unlike God thing that we can do. It is to repudiate in the most destructive and drastic way possible the very meaning of our God-given existence. Of course, there is a second presentation of the story of creation in the book of Genesis. It comes in chapter 2, and it seems to me that it's a much more earthy kind of story. It tells of God making a man out of the dust of the earth, and then creating the rich tapestry of animal life, among which, however, the text tells us, no companion suitable to be a helpmate was found for the man. And the reason for all this, God expresses it in these words. It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him. It's then that God puts the man into a sleep, takes one of his ribs, and forms another human being, to whom the man, when he awakes, gives the name woman. For, as the text says, she is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. And this is why, the text goes on, a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. Soon after, in the logic of the story, the man and the woman have intercourse and their son Cain is born. In their coming together, in their being fruitful, they are in the most evocative and powerful way living out their vocation to be the image of the life-giving God. As I read and reflect on these extraordinary stories at the very beginnings of our shared sacred texts, I'm struck by the fact that it is only when the man and the woman encounter each other and enter into a relationship with each other that they really begin to be the images of God they were created to be. They couldn't do it alone. They had to do it together. There is, I think, a profound truth in all of this about what being human is really all about. It's a truth which is confirmed by our human experience, even though, at times, we can seem to be pushed by inner and outer forces in the opposite direction. Human beings, men and women, you and me, we're made for communion, not for isolation. We are made for interdependence, not for independence. We are made in such a way as to need each other, not in such a way as to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and go it alone. We are made in opposition to what Cain seems to be suggesting with his famous question put to God in chapter 4 of Genesis. We are in fact made to be our brother's keeper. This is why marriage matters. This is why family matters. This is why community matters. It's why religious freedom and religious tolerance and religious sensitivity matter. It is in fact why any of our rights or freedoms or mutual responsibilities exist. We are, as human beings, inextricably woven together, and the good of one is the good of all. We are made to be, in God's creation, the living images of the transcendent one, giving expression to God's creative, life-giving presence in the world through our own life-giving and creative lives. Pope John Paul II, writing to his Catholic brothers and sisters at the beginning of the 3rd millennium, reminded us that my brother and sister is a part of me. It's a conviction that comes initially from John Paul II's belief that every human being is made in the image and likeness of God. Perhaps this is a vision to which all of us here this evening might be able to subscribe. Let me conclude with a further thought which can deepen our reflection and our prayer, and which takes us back in a sense to where we began. If we are made in the image and likeness of the God who is creative and life-giving, God's ongoing revelation of himself to his chosen people also enables us to understand that we are made in the image of the God who is Father. Of course, fatherhood is intimately related in our human experience to the call to be creative and life-giving. But in coming to understand that God is our merciful Father, as Rabbi David's prayer expressed it this evening, we realise that God is not like our fathers, but rather that our fathers, and we as fathers, and also, of course, as mothers, both physical and spiritual, are called to be like God. God is merciful. God is loving. God is life-giving. And as David's psalm reminds us, his fatherhood finds expression in his shepherding care, as he leads us to green pastures and quiet waters, This is the gift we can offer to each other as members of the Jewish and Catholic communities, and which we can then together offer to our society as a precious gift. May the God of our ancestors, the living God, our merciful Father, enable us through his presence in our lives to be faithful to all that he is asking of us. Thank you very much.